Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, on the 19th day in a row of the ongoing barbaric Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip, over 6,500 innocent Palestinian people, mainly children, have been killed. The UN says the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip is disastrous due to the cutting off of fuel by the Israeli occupier, as UNRWA is to cease its activities there. From New York, the Algerian Minister of Foreign Affairs has called for an immediate end to the random Zionist strikes on the Gaza Strip for the blockade imposed on it to be lifted. UN Secretary General has said that it is important to recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. Hello and welcome on Radio Algeria International, still with our special coverage for what is going on in the Gaza Strip. On the 19th day in a row, the ongoing barbaric Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip, over 6,500 innocent Palestinians, mainly children, have been killed. The Palestinian Health Ministry said that as of this morning, 6,504 Palestinians were killed and around 19,000 injured in the Israeli airstrike and attacks on Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and West Bank since October 7th. It said 6,400 were killed in the Gaza Strip and 17,000 were injured, while 104 were killed in the West Bank and 900 were injured. It said 70% of those killed were children, women and elderly, including 2,500 children. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has called from New York for an immediate end to the random Zionist strikes on the Gaza Strip and for the blockade imposed on it to be lifted. In his address to the Security Council meeting convened to examine the situation in Palestine, Ahmed Attaf said that this session is being held in an exceptional context, which has led to a scandalous distortion of the facts and basic data of the Palestinian cause, which could never have taken place were it not for the convergence of two phenomena, each contributing to the aggravation of the impact of the other. More details with Said Bouazi.
The first of the two phenomena is the almost total marginalization of the Palestinian cause and the denigration of its importance on the international stage. It is also about unjustifiable complacency towards the Zionist occupation, which enjoys absolute, unlimited, unconditional and unjustified immunity, he insisted. With regard to the phenomenon of marginalization of the Palestinian cause, the foreign minister spoke of a total absence of the cause from the priorities of the international community, which has shirked its responsibilities going back on its decisions and promises concerning the establishment of an independent Palestinian state on the 1967 borders with Al-Quds as its capital. The Palestinian cause has not benefited from any serious peace initiative since the 1990s, which has hampered international diplomatic efforts for nearly 3 decades, this cause remaining hostage to an extremely dangerous illusion, that of the quest for peace, security and stability in the Middle East, to the detriment of the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people and on the ruins of their state, the minister maintained. With regard to the Zionist entity's complacency, Ahmed Attaf warned that it has only aggravated the situation by allowing the annexation of Palestinian territories by force and hegemony over more than 78% of the West Bank, dealing a fatal final blow to the two-state project as a framework for a peaceful, just and viable solution to the Arab-Zionist conflict. This complacency has only fed the discriminatory policies imposed and rejected in the occupied city of Al-Quds, whose legal and historical status is to be changed through the grand plan to Judaize it by force. This complacency, which is tantamount to immunity for the Zionist entity, has paved the way for more massacres, the forced displacement of tens of thousands of Palestinians, and the destruction of their vital infrastructure and homes over the last 2 decades, he added. In the same vein, Ahmed Attaf underlined that the strikes on the Gaza Strip are just another hideous episodes in the series of barbaric crimes unprecedented in the history of the region in terms of the tragic toll committed by the Zionist occupation against a defenseless people betrayed and deprived of the most basic means of life, rather of survival. The latest developments, explained the minister, put the United Nations Organization, its values and its principles to the test, calling for the logic of law to prevail over that of force, for equity rather than variable geometry, and for compliance with binding safeguards rather than impunity when it comes to the Zionist occupation.
Today we are seeing a limpid situation, a very clear situation, which there's no room for interpretation. The Palestinian people is faced with a very difficult choice. On the one hand, they could choose to leave their territory and their legitimate rights behind, and the other choice is ethnic cleansing, racial cleansing, and the eradication of the project of a national Palestinian state. President, these events put the UN, its principles and its values before a significant test. We need to ensure that a logic of law prevails and not the logic of force, and also the logic of legality and not double standards. It is the legally binding criteria must be respected, and we must move against the logic of impunity and tolerance to these crimes, particularly when we talk about this Israeli colonialist occupation.
Ahmed Attaf called on the UN Security Council to speed up the lifting of the blockade imposed on Gaza, which in itself constitutes a war crime and a crime against humanity, to put an end to the random strikes that have cost the lives of thousands of innocent souls, which constitute a war crime and genocide, and to the forced displacement of populations, which has risen to the level of a crime of ethnic cleansing, and finally to allow the unconditional and unrestricted delivery of aid to the people of Gaza.
For the short term, we call on your council to take the following measures. Firstly, lift the unjust blockade on the Gaza Strip, because this is a war crime, a crime against humanity. Secondly, we call on the council to put an end to the senseless bombing that has led to thousands of innocent victims. This is also a war crime, a crime of genocide. Thirdly, forced displacement of Palestinian people must end. This could also be seen as a crime of ethnic cleansing. And fourthly, we must allow humanitarian assistance to be delivered to the people in Gaza without restriction or condition. This is an appeal that we repeat here before your council.
With regard to the future political solution, the minister called on the Security Council to be aware of the glaring truth established by the history of the region and which cannot be circumvented, which confirms that no peace would be viable if it is established on criminality, injustice, oppression, marginalization, exclusion, and discrimination, just as there is no lasting peace to be built in the Middle East in the absence of a just and viable settlement of the Palestinian cause on the basis of international legality.
Here we call on the Security Council to be aware of a clear, obvious reality. Lasting peace cannot be based on crime and injustice. Lasting peace can't be built on marginalization, exclusion, and discrimination. Lasting peace in the Middle East can only be built on a just and lasting solution to the Palestinian question within the framework of international law. And the principles and content of this have been were developed here at the United Nations in this building, at the Security Council.
So he asked, how can 87 resolutions adopted since the beginning of this conflict be reversed simply because the occupying force has decided not to comply with them? Would the Security Council accept that all its resolutions on the Palestinian cause should be flouted simply because the occupying force is looking for a tailor-made legal system to apply exclusively to it? Asked Ahmed Attaf, adding that this historical context attests to the responsibility vested in the Security Council, which is called upon to assume it fully.
The Algerian Minister for Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has met his Palestinian counterpart, Riyad al-Maliki, on the sidelines of his participation in a high-level meeting of the Security Council held at the headquarters of the United Nations in New York. The meeting was an opportunity to discuss the latest developments in the occupied Palestinian territories with regard to the barbaric Zionist aggression against Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip. On this occasion, the two parties reviewed the diplomatic efforts to put an end to this aggression and to deal with its humanitarian repercussions. It's by making it possible to bring aid without restrictions or conditions. In this connection, al-Maliki reiterated Palestine's appreciations, leadership, government and people of Algeria's constant and unconditional support for the Palestinian cause, welcoming in this respect the urgent humanitarian aid granted by Algeria to the Palestinian people to alleviate the suffering of the inhabitants of Gaza, victims of a total blockade. Mr. Attaf has held bilateral talks with his Indonesian counterpart, Mr. Retno Marsudi, at the United Nations headquarters in New York on the sidelines of his participation. The two sides discussed the tragic situation caused by the Zionist aggression against civilians in the Gaza Strip and exchanged information on the humanitarian aid provided by the two countries for the benefit of the Palestinian people. Mr. Attaf has also held bilateral talks with the Libyan minister in charge of the management of the affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in the Government of National Unity of Libya, Tahir Bauer. He has also held talks with his Dutch counterpart, from the Republic of Gabon, and the one from Brazil, whose country holds the rotating presidency of the Security Council for the month of October. The former Minister of Foreign Affairs Ahmed Talib Ibrahimi and retired General Rashid Benyelis have denounced the genocide being perpetrated against the Palestinian people in Gaza with the complicity of the West, while deploring the silence of international institutions. The two personalities wrote in a statement on the ongoing genocide in Gaza, quote, "We fervent supporters of the anti-colonialist struggle and militants of national liberation salute the heroic resistance of the Palestinian people and its valiant mujahideen who on the 7th of October 2023 launched a large-scale operation, the result of which, not least, was to put an end to the myth of the Israeli army and its invincibility, which caused the Zionist entity, which has not stopped trying to make up for the revenge on the people of Gaza, subjecting them to the deluge of fire." They said, "In this murderous madness, nothing and no one is spared. The city has been reduced to rubble, the population crushed under the bombs. Nothing escaped his or this vindictiveness, not even hospitals, schools, mosques and churches. The victims, mostly children, number in the tens of thousands." They pointed out that, assured on the impunity afforded it by its powerful protectors led by the United States of America, the Zionist entity plans to kill as many Gazawis as possible on the spot and deport the rest outside the Gaza Strip. In so doing, the Zionist entity is inflicting on the Palestinian people what the Jews suffered from the Nazis during the Second World War. The two personalities deplored the silence of international institutions and the position of certain Arab regimes that have harmed the Palestinian cause by normalizing the relations with a supremacist entity that in truth harbors deep contempt for them. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki has denounced the failure of the UN Security Council to adopt a united stance on the Zionist aggression against Palestine as inexcusable. Denouncing the massacres perpetrated by the Zionist entity, he felt that the Security Council had the duty to stop them.
Continued failure at this council is inexcusable. In the last 2 weeks, over 5,700 Palestinians have been killed, including over 2,300 children and 1,300 women. Compared to the population of Gaza, that is the equivalent of 145,000 British citizens or 700,000 US citizens. Almost all those killed by Israel are civilians. Over 1 million displaced, 170,000 housing units destroyed. Excellencies, only international law and peace are worthy of your country's unconditional support. More injustice and more killing will not make Israel safer. No amount of weapons, no alliance will bring to it security. Only peace will. Peace with Palestine and its people. The fate of the Palestinian people cannot continue to be dispossession, displacement, denial of rights and death. Our freedom is the condition of shared peace and security.
Last week, the UN Security Council initially rejected a Russian draft resolution calling for a humanitarian ceasefire. Only 5 of the Council's 15 member states supported the text. A second draft resolution drawn up by Brazil, which takes over the presidency of the Council in October, was blocked by an American veto. A third resolution drafted by the Americans is circulating among the member states, according to diplomatic sources. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said that it is important to recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation, he added.
The situation in the Middle East is growing more dire by the hour. The war in Gaza is raging and risks spiraling throughout the region. Divisions are splintering societies, tensions threaten to boil over. At a crucial moment like this, it is vital to be clear on principles, starting with the fundamental principle of respecting and protecting civilians. It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. They have seen their land steadily devoured by settlements and plagued by violence, their economy stifled, their people displaced, and their homes demolished. Their hopes for a political solution to their plight have been vanishing. But the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas, and those appalling attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and condemned the clear violations of humanitarian law in the Palestinian territories, which has been continuously bombarded since the 7th of October. Saeed Bougazi has more.
International aid has begun to arrive into the Gaza Strip, where 2.4 million Palestinians live in catastrophic humanitarian conditions. But it is only a drop in an ocean of needs, said UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
Thankfully, some humanitarian relief is finally getting into Gaza, but it is a drop of aid in an ocean of need. In addition, our UN fuel supplies in Gaza will run out in a matter of days, and that would be another disaster. Without fuel, aid cannot be delivered, hospitals will not have power, and drinking water cannot be purified or even pumped. The people of Gaza need continuous aid delivery at a level that corresponds to the enormous needs. And that aid must be delivered without restrictions. I salute our UN colleagues and humanitarian partners in Gaza working under hazardous conditions and risking their lives to provide aid to those in need. They are an inspiration.
6 hospitals in the Gaza Strip have already had to close due to lack of fuel, according to the World Health Organization. The UN is urgently calling for the delivery of fuel, notably to operate generators in the hospitals, purify the water and enable trucks to move around to deliver cargo. According to the United Nations, a ceasefire to allow the arrival of this aid would only benefit Hamas. However, humanitarian pauses in the fighting must be considered, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the UN Security Council, while President Joe Biden felt that the delivery of aid was not fast enough. The Gaza Strip, an impoverished 362 square kilometer territory subject to a land, air and sea blockade since Hamas seized power there in 2007, has been under a state of complete siege since 9th October by the Zionist entity, which has cut off water, electricity and food supplies. Several dozen lorries loaded with international aid have arrived in Gaza since Saturday from Egypt via the Rafah border crossing, the only crossing point into Gaza not under Israeli control. But for the UN, at least 100 trucks a day are needed. Without fuel, aid cannot be delivered, hospitals have no electricity, and drinking water cannot be purified or even pumped, Antonio Guterres said on Tuesday. Time is running out. We urgently need fuel, said Juliette Touma, Communication Director of UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, which fears it will have to halt its operations from Wednesday evening. But the Zionists are refusing to allow fuel into the Gaza Strip, claiming this would benefit Hamas. Since 15 October, the Israeli army has been calling on civilians in the north of the Gaza Strip to evacuate to the south. But the strikes also continue to target this part of the territory close to the Egyptian border, where several 100,000 civilians are massed. In all, according to the UN, at least 1.4 million Palestinians have fled their homes since the start of the war.
In his speech, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres also paid tribute to all UN staff on the ground in Gaza who bring aid and save the lives of thousands of innocent Palestinians at a time when the occupying Israeli war machine continues its barbaric aggression.
The relentless bombardment of Gaza by Israeli forces, the level of civilian casualties, and the wholesale destruction of neighborhoods continue to mount and are deeply alarming. I mourn and honor dozens of UN colleagues working for UNRWA. Sadly, at least 35 and counting, killed in the bombardment of Gaza over the last 2 weeks. I owe to their families my condemnation of these and many other similar killings. Protecting civilians does not mean ordering more than 1 million people to evacuate to the south, where there is no shelter, no food, no water, no medicine and no fuel, and then continuing to bomb the south itself. I am deeply concerned about the clear violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing in Gaza. Let me be clear, no party to an armed conflict is above international humanitarian law.
Radio Al Jazeera International contacted UNRWA spokesman and media advisor Adnan Abu Hassan, who gave us further details about the casualties among UNRWA members in Gaza.
Yes, we have nearly 36 from our colleagues that have been killed since the start of the escalation on 7th of October. But we believe that the number is higher than that because of the huge destruction, and there's no ability actually to remove the rubble. And so we believe we may have a higher number of colleagues who have been killed during this escalation.
UNRWA spokesman added that no place in Gaza is safe for the population due to the occupying Israeli air raids.
There is a clear message that there is no safe place in Gaza. Everyone is exposed to be attacked any moment. Despite that we are in UN installations, we have the blue flag hovering over our buildings. We are sending all the GPS to Israeli authority twice a day, so that no one can tell us that after that they attacked us mistakenly. But unfortunately, that we have been attacked. Nearly 40 of our installations have been, hit directly or indirectly, and we have also 14 of displaced people have been killed in our schools, and nearly 200 have been injured. So it's a message, a clear message that you are in Gaza, whether if you are in your installation or you are in the street or the hospital and everywhere, you might be attacked without any warning.
Let's recall that the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees could cease its activities as early as today for lack of fuel in the Gaza Strip, besieged and shelled again by the Zionist occupation army. The Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates today condemned in the strongest terms attacks by Israeli officials against the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, consider them unjustified, premeditated, and display lack of respect and lack of commitment by the occupying state for the United Nations, its charter and its resolutions regarding the Palestinian issue. It accused Israel of seeking to nullify the role of the United Nations in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, particularly the role of the UN chief in his capacity as Secretary General due to his positions consistent with international law and the United Nations Charter, especially his role and the role of his team and representatives known for their effort to end Israel's open-ended and destructive war against the Palestinian people, to stop the displacement of Palestinians, and to urgently open humanitarian corridors to continuously bring humanitarian relief aid to the people in the Gaza Strip. The parliaments of Algeria and Kuwait have submitted on behalf of the Arab group a request for the inclusion of an urgent item on the agenda of the 147th Assembly of the Interparliamentary Union, which is being held in Angola, entitled Ending the War and Human Rights Violations in Gaza. Humanitarian aid provided by the Algerian state for the benefit of the Palestinian people continues to be delivered to the Al Arish airport in Egypt by 2 military aircraft of the Algerian Air Force. And here in Algeria, the 26th Algiers Book Fair, Otsila, which will be officially open today, Wednesday, welcomes Africa as guest of honor, and 1,283 publishing houses from 61 countries, including the State of Palestine, which will be presenting their latest literary, scientific and other publications, as well as a varied program of intellectual and cultural activities. You're listening to Radio Algeria International, and now a reminder of our top stories. On the 19th day in a row of the ongoing barbaric Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip, over 6,500 innocent Palestinians, mainly children, have been killed. The UN says the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip is disastrous due to the cutting off of fuel by the Israeli occupier, as the UN or UNRWA is to cease its activities there. From New York, the Algerian Minister of Foreign Affairs has called for an immediate end to the random Zionist strikes on the Gaza Strip and for the blockade imposed on it to be lifted. UN Secretary General has said that it is important to recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. That was the English service of Radio Algeria International. Thank you so much for joining us for our special coverage about the situation prevailing in the Gaza Strip.